welcome to everyone joining us today. I'm Lila, I'm the CMO at Lead Forensics, and today I'm joined by Kane Bird, Head of Marketing Communications, Kane, at CSI. Today, we're going to be walking through how CSI uplifted their lead generation by 650%. By turning their website into a revenue engine. We'll hopefully be able to give you some top tips to enable you to do the same. So first of all, let's start off with an introduction, Kane. So can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you guys do at CSI?
Absolutely. So I'll give you a little bit of a prologue about myself. So I've been doing marketing now for maybe a decade plus. I've got a bit of an unconventional journey through that. So I started in-house, test bed in agency, worked my way up through content. So I'm a content guy. I do a lot around organic, so growth, organic channels like SEO, content. And then I've come back to being in-house. So I'm at CSI now, head of marketing communications, like you mentioned. CSI itself is a tech MSP. But it's quite interesting because what we do is we have quite a niche field we play in when you drill down into that. So it's not very e-commerce-y or anything like that. It's we work with power infrastructure. We do hybrid cloud piece, data protection, some high-scale storage. It's enterprise-grade work. And as I'm always reminded by our CRO or our sales lead, it's kind of a needle in the haystack with our ICP. So they keep me very busy.
Oh, well, and absolutely in the B2B space, which is obviously what we're talking about today. You couldn't get any more B2B if you tried, I think. And we've chatted a couple of times now, so I know you've got some really interesting experiences, both at CSI and also you mentioned obviously agency side previously. So what we'll do is we'll get sort of started quite quickly to give ourselves sort of maximum time to kind of understand those experiences. Before we do that, though, if anyone has any questions that they'd like to pose to Kane at any point, then please do pop them in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye out for them, and hopefully if we have time at the end, we'll be able to pose those to Kane. So please do just pop those in the chat. And I also wanted to mention that today's webinar is brought to you by Lead Forensics, so the #1 software in website visitor identification. And by attending today, you're going to get a free digital copy of our recently released book, which is 101 ways to drive revenue from your website. It's 481 pages. It's a lot of content in there. But also, if you wanted to check out who is going to be visiting your website and who visits your website day in, day out, and you fancy taking a demonstration of Lead Forensics, we'll send you a free copy of the hardback version of the book too. I've got one here to show you. It's a bit of a beast. It's quite large, but it's packed with information about all the various different ways that you can look to basically utilize your most underutilized assets, or your best asset available. So you can get a free hardback copy of this book. So what I'll do is I'll just start up a poll quickly just to see if anyone is interested in taking a demonstration of Lead Forensics and then obviously getting a copy of their book. So I'll just pop that up quickly now. I'll just leave that up for just a couple of seconds, and then we'll kind of get going, which gives you a couple of moments, Kane, just to have a think about my next question, which is going to be, where did you start? So let's roll back to, where was CSI? What was the picture like before you decided to kind of overhaul everything? What were the challenges that you were facing in terms of generating just new business opportunities, that sort of thing? So we'll sort of set the scene and start at the beginning, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So the poll, and I've ended the poll. A few more coming in now. I'm going to end the poll right now and hand over to you, Kane.
Fab. So it's a sort of pre-transformation era. So when I joined CSI, to set the scene, the guys had a website with a lot of traffic coming into it, relatively irrelevant keywords, a bit of bot traffic coming in. So it was a question of, hey, I've got a piece of digital real estate. How do I generate value from the sum of the parts that I have? And there's kind of two key bits there. Value, typically, when someone's saying that to you, means profit. And some of the parts is quite interesting, because when you look at a digital strategy, quite often companies will have bits and bobs, not necessarily a cohesive whole. So I might have some old hat social media that I've had for a while. I haven't necessarily kind of done an audit against those. I've got a couple of landing pages, but it doesn't necessarily sell my brand. It's not necessarily generating MQLs that actually impact the bottom line. And it's kind of what I said in the beginning about the revenue engine. So bringing that idea in, we wanted to create a digital footprint. And I think digital footprint is quite an interesting concept, because it's this idea of measurability against your digital asset, your website, that's available via the addressable market in search engines, for example. So I brought in the knowledge I have around organic, around keyword research. So that kind of filled, bringing that into the website and giving it a performance-driven, but a technical tint as well. Because one thing we quite often see with the competitive websites in the tech space is they're quite heavy, lots of files, lots of content. So they're quite sluggish. There's a lot of disjointed touch points in terms of the UX, user design. So that's kind of a hindrance. Now, quite interestingly, when I was onboarded, it was a sort of 30, 60, 90 with 2 website rebuilds. So it was a very compact timeline. And there's a task in there of almost looking at the MarTech stack or the technologies we're using, as well as kind of going on into reporting and data use. So to touch on the 2 websites, so we also have an entity in the US called Tech Trade. It does the same thing, but it's more of a microcosm, it's more drilled down and more focused. And that presents anyone familiar with SEO with a very particular challenge of, you have 2 domains that sell fundamentally the same thing. How do you not self-compete? How do you not cannibalize your own content, for example? And the plaster for that at the moment is lang tags. That's what people typically tell you to do. It's kind of quick and dirty way of communicating to Google not to overlay the 2 pages or where the original authored content comes from. But what we've done over time is build in a bit of a content strategy, build in a more of a bespoke understanding of the ICP, put a bigger emphasis on organic coming into it. So when I joined, the website was getting maybe 2 or 3 leads. They weren't closing per year. We closed out the first year with at least 30 organic leads. It doesn't sound like a lot, but the other day our sales guy said to me, websites don't bring in leads. It's not really a thing. And that's quite an interesting idea in itself. And I think it goes back to the very beginning, what I was saying about digital real estate and, incohesive digital real estate that people have that aren't driving profit. But we've managed to, as the title of the webinar infers, bring in this uplift, but through inbound. So that's really interesting. So it's people finding us in a very competitive search landscape around technology and submitting organic inquiries and then being able to service that. So that was a big chunk of the first kind of few days of me stepping into the company. We were able as well in that time to revisit the MarTech stack, which is where we obviously introduced lead forensics. We were actually able, shout out to Leela, she's our old head of marketing, she's absolutely brilliant. We're able to sort of trim out some costs there as well. We had some underspend. So actually we ended up finishing the year 2023 with 2.5 million plus in organic inbound lead revenue and a reduction in cost by looking at MarTech stack. Because I know there's this whole question about budgetary ceilings. You asked about obstacles. That's a big one. And that obviously always kind of stamps down on innovation. But we were able to come in and revisit what SEO tools we're using for visibility. But personally, and this kind of addresses what I think a lot of people are experiencing with obstacles is there's a visibility gap emerging. So it's when UA sunset and GA4 came out, there's a huge uproar, I think, technically in the community, because first of all, for its usability, but also just analytics, it feels like it's tightening up on what it's giving you as information. So what are you plugging that in with? And I think that's a really valuable question that we've all kind of been quietly asking ourselves in the back of our mind. And that really comes down to an obstacle around data integrity, kind of data recency and data degradation, which is kind of a theme I'd love to explore a bit more on the webinar today. But you also have a lot of other obstacles in the background, because we work in a regulated space. So we've also got compliance issues. And I think more and more regulation is waking up and it's clamping down on more and more people. So we saw the possible threat of cookie apocalypse with Google, but it's actually brought out consent mode. And that impacts advertising, and that's been more regulated. Also, the users we're talking to at the end of the day, everyone's more digitally conscious and more digitally aware. So user privacy is tightening all the time. Anyone aware with US headlines, we see Google's constantly under the cosh for bringing down the hammer a bit more on what's being given out in terms of analytics. So that's where we stood. And the MarTech rebuild, the stack rebuild was kind of a nice part 2 or a sequel to doing the website rebuild, because it was, how do you you've come in, you built a digital real estate. What are you grading it against? What's this idea of measurability? What are you actually going to be looking at? So full disclosure, we looked at new SEO tools. We brought those in. We brought lead forensics in. And so end to end, what we do is we also have some paid media. So Google Ads. So that brings in a fresh stream of traffic that answers that that data recency question. And then we plug that automation to the website with lead forensics, goes into a pane of view in our CRM and Salesforce. And then we're actually looking nowadays of not just having this inbound, because our inbound game is really strong, is how can we recycle that into an outbound type model?
Okay. Interesting. And so in terms of that, so you mentioned that your first sort of steps on that journey was that you just basically had to rebuild everything. Is that right? So you had like lots of kind of disparate information, I think, which is the case with a lot of B2B websites. Is people are thinking that they're not actually visiting them, and then they don't actually have a good UX. And so it sounds like that was one of the first steps, was actually think about your buyers when they visit your website, what journey are they going on, and then making sure that you actually present where they're looking for you too. So it sounds like you did quite a lot of SEO work as well. Is that correct?
That is exactly that. You should never be afraid of doing an audit as well. It was a perfect opportunity to do an audit. So we had the right information. It was just displaying it in the most simple, click-friendly way to reduce how easy it was for a user to first of all find us in search engine. So that's the SEO piece. And then when they found us, how do you reduce the number of clicks for them to find the right information on the website? So you then start looking at the real estate of the page. You know, when they scroll down, how high up is the right information, for example? You know, are they being coerced as they go through? Are you sort of naturally answering the questions you would have if you were a cold user landing on your own web page? So you're kind of just putting yourself in their shoes. So, you know, the two go hand in hand. It's Google wants to, it's on a bit of a mission to serve up the most relevant content to the end user. So yes, it matters that you've got the keyword piece in there, but fundamentally more and more it's asking you to make content that is just, has utility to it. It does answer a particular question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not just superficial, it's got substance underneath as well.
Exactly that.
I did read that from a website build perspective, you should build for a 5-year-old navigation. So, for age 5, as in like for a child. So they make it really, 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 really simple. So as if it's a total lay person looking at the site. Now, I don't know about anybody else's small child, but my 4-year-old can navigate a website better than I can. So I don't know how true that actually is. So you obviously went on a bit of a journey from kind of looking at the sort of looking at that whole digital footprint, that whole digital infrastructure, really looking at SEO. You then talked about how you started to optimize those after you had built them. So by looking at that that MarTech stack a little bit more, can you talk about how you then have used kind of data to become more data driven in your approach? So you've got your foundation ready, but I know that you're really quite advanced in terms of how you use data. So can you walk us through that a little bit more?
Absolutely. Some of it is addressing really challenging issues. I don't think that particularly unsexy issues around data degradation, for example.
Yeah.
The recency. And I had a conversation recently, and anyone who's a marketer on the call will understand this, is you'll get an email about buying data bricks or buying data. So I had a discussion with a database, and their kind of function is to nurture this and enrich this pool of data that you can purchase from. And they've had, since COVID, at least a 5 to 10% loss of data year on year, so data degradation over time. And the last year they had 30%. And I think that is something that's not particularly being tracked anywhere, but also is a particularly large issue that we're all going to eventually face. So there's a tightening up of how do you collect data and capture data in the first place, but then there's also storing data and how do you keep that recent and fresh and usable for a sales department later on. It's a particularly challenging concept. So for us, the front end piece of it is being compliant, capturing data in a way that's drilling down and useful. So where we use lead forensics is finding that needle in the haystack that I sort of mentioned at the beginning. So we can almost grade our own homework. We can find the businesses that are right to us. So it's almost like an account-based marketing approach, if you will. And then you can groom the businesses that are relevant to our ICP from the lead forensics data capture that will be automated into our CRM. And then we can do a bit more enrichment on top of that. I mean, these days, more and more marketing is about pre-qualification. So that lead forensics piece really helps with that hard question of how are you really enriching the data, how are you qualifying it before it even gets into a seller's black book to dial. What we're doing, I think with the data degradation question, that there's only two things you can do. So there's either really expensive enrichment piece that comes after, which is, you have to have a lot of headcount. You have to have a lot of guys cooling into these accounts to figure out that the person still works there, or you have to keep the data fresh that's coming in. So I think the real answer is somewhere in between the two. So you've got to have a constant stream of traffic. So everyone who's got a website is typically looking at, they are relatively, I think, vanity metrics of traffic volume in time. And it's not something you can go tell your CFO, but it's something that's useful between us, is to say, yeah, I've got traffic coming in, it's sustainable, it's scalable. But then you also need to do something in between that to give over to sales some usable bit of data, and just keep enriching that. So you'll get to the typical email campaigns and all that kind of things to keep on top of that.
And so you've used data to align sales and marketing. So you mentioned that you have Salesforce. Is that the CRM that your team use?
It is at the moment, yes.
And so often getting that alignment and that data to pass through from marketing to sales is really quite tricky. And I actually think that one of the biggest stumbling points is often the quality of the data. And I think you're quite right, is that a lot of marketing teams, it's one of those things that you absolutely don't want to think about, is the quality of your database. A lot of marketing teams will go and buy a database, or they will procure, content downloads or something like that, and they'll be still marketing to that content downloader 3-4 years after they've downloaded that content, and that person's moved jobs 2 or 3 times. But by that point, I think the average tenure in marketing is something like 10 years 2 years in a role or something like that. So your databases do degrade quite quickly, and particularly I think you mentioned after COVID, it was interesting stat you had there that that someone had seen a 30% sort of quality diminish in terms of their data. I can well believe that. And so I think that actually it's one of those things that nobody really wants to look at, is the data. But yeah, it's the foundation of everything. It's the foundation of everything that you do from a marketing perspective, but also the foundation of the relationship through to marketing and sales. And so how have you achieved that? And is that something that was fundamental to get right for you from the outset?
I think it's something that we've developed over time. And I think it's like who's owning data in a company. And typically marketing is the vanguard for data. And I think that's more and more where the job's going. But the sales and marketing alignment piece is really interesting. I think there's a couple of things you can do to ease the tension off there, because I think you're really right. And I think data is a part of the problem, not the problem, but part of what causes a problem and the tension. And I think the other part of it is sometimes when you're talking about lead generation, there can be a bit of a false economy if you jump into a conversation about volume. So if you jump in and go, I need to have 30 leads this month straight away, send that to the sales guys. You first of all might have an expectation issue about what the lead should actually look like. And I do think that can change company to company. I think that's a very real thing.
Yeah.
So being expectation setters is critical. But that's sort of big thing about the false economy emerging is you've got to look at the quality first of what you're getting and what you're sending. And that's data. That's what are you doing to sit on top of that data to enrich it, to pre-qualify it enough that it's something that's worth being in a pipeline somewhere that a seller's going to pick up and call. And what you typically see is the fallout of that, where people are just going after scale. As you get to the end of a year, and it's a marketing department that might have 200-300 leads up on the scoreboard, and then sales might have a 0.3% conversion. So two of those leads have become something. And then even against that, what's the margin? Maybe it's $5,000, and the actual number that the seller needed to retire was hundreds of thousands. So you kind of need the quality piece before you get to rush into the quantity piece. And I think that generates a bit of tension. I think the other thing that we could do to help ourselves, and data is the step towards it, but speak from a marketing perspective, speak in the kind of love language of sales, or have a common language. What are commercially minded people in the business also using as the metrics to grade themselves with? If it's margin, is it gross? Is it net? Is it what does that look like? I mean, I remember studying all the ROAS and all these wonderful metrics that have never come up in conversation, because if you're locked in a boardroom with the CFO, you're not going to get either retain your budget or a budget extension if you start talking about the really shiny new keywords you got that month. And there's value for those metrics, but I think that they're relatively vanity metrics for a reason. You need to kind of talk in that hard margin number about what you're generating, and data is your friend in doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to confirm on that acronym that you just mentioned there, which when you're talking with an FD, so ROAS is return on ad spend. So in case anyone is familiar with ROAS, but that's the kind of lingo that you need to have down.
That's exactly what I'm trying to avoid. Yeah, you just need the common language when you're reporting back. But yeah, data's your best friend for that.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that actually there are lots of metrics out there, and I've worked in similar to you actually, agency side for prior to my time at Need Forensics, and working with lots of different tech brands. And there were definitely the marketing departments out there that would really heavily rely on their vanity metrics. Well, sorry, I call them vanity metrics. Sorry, that's probably not a phrase.
In-house, it becomes like a default. Yeah.
I know. Sorry, like a vanity metric where it is actually meaningless, and so that can often be like a content downloader. Ultimately, there's no point in having 1,000 content downloaders if actually none of them are meet your ICP, or if none of them are going to ultimately be meaningful for the business. And so I think you're right. It's often important to know those things as a marketeer, so that you can look at that as an integer in the pipeline to success. It's like, we have to get these downloaders, but then we have to convert them to the next stage too. And I think if marketeers can become scientific in their approach, so that they're really looking at that pipeline, I think that can really help. And I really like what you said there as well about being consistent in expectations, because I think that is a huge, oftentimes sales and marketing are just not aligned on what a lead looks like. And that can be a huge frustration for a lot of sales teams, right?
So the expectation piece, when you talked about obstacles at the beginning, all of that can be distilled down to expectations. And the other thing is expectations are contagious. So when you talk to a commercially minded individual in a business, often when they're saying marketing, they're probably just meaning lead generation. And that's more and more my expectation of what I'm hearing from people is they actually mean lead generation. That's a microcosm of marketing. There's a whole host of other things. There's branding, there's all other things you could be doing. But you kind of need to own the expectation piece in marketing to understand what the lead is, understand what marketing means for that business as well. What is your role? So, CSI, we'll probably do 70 to 80% lead generation. And then we want to do some demand generation on top of that. But that's because it's quite commercially minded. But I think you can't be afraid to ask those really fundamental questions about what marketing actually means for the company you're in, rather than running into it and being like, I know what marketing is, because we're really fluent in it. But I've discovered that lots of other departments kind of have conventional ideas about marketing, and that kind of traps them. And then you've got to challenge that expectation. But you're totally right. I mean, people pick up a definition of a lead from different tools as well. I mean, it just seeps into your field of view, and you become, sure that you know what a lead is. But once you kind of have a mutually agreed upon expectation, sales will potentially start to love you.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, like you say, because if you have an alignment on what do leads look like, what are you classifying as a lead, and you're all aligned with that, then you know what you're working towards together, and then that kind of miscommunication just disappears entirely. And you mentioned a while back, Kane, that kind of like you're looking for you've had sort of 30 organic leads or something, and then you're saying, well, it's not very many, but ultimately it's about the value of those leads. You could have 800, 1,000, 10,000 leads, but ultimately, if you don't know what the revenue is that you're going to generate off of the back of those leads, it's better to have 30 high value leads than 10,000 nonsense leads. And so you mentioned also that then obviously you've got, is it 2.3 million?
2.5 plus, but that is from inbound. That's from a small set of leads. There's not an enormous set of leads. I mean, I've trialed with the 200 plus leads before per year, and I've had exactly that problem of low conversion rates. And that's kind of what I was alluding to with volume. When you initially run into it and think, I'm going to go after large volume, that's also really expensive to do if you're doing sort of quick and dirty through paid ads. Whereas if you start with quality, bring that in, understand what sales capacity looks like as well. And that's just a really good conversation to have. What are they actually able to work with per week, per month? and then you kind of have a better goal to go after. And, you get the quality piece in before the quantity piece. And I think you'll be able from there to then scale, is my point.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I agree with you. And I think that actually knowing the capacity and the bandwidth of your sales team to work good quality leads is important, because ultimately, if you can give them lesser quantity leads, but higher quality, and they would much rather spend their time on those leads than just a whole load of content downloaders that actually, don't meet the criteria, or, they're chasing their tail on the contact information, that sort of thing. So I think that actually that alignment is really important. And one thing we say about lead forensics is really that, if someone's visiting your website, they've got active intent, right? No one's visiting a B2B website in their spare time to check out a nice holiday or something like that. They've got intent, right? And so I know that you've plugged the lead forensics data into your Salesforce. How are you passing that through to your sales team at the moment? Because you mentioned that you're sort of like now starting to dovetail inbound and outbound together.
Yeah, I think lead forensics does a really good job actually of blurring the boundaries between the two, and removing a bit of the reluctance to do cold calling, because suddenly the data is more qualified. It's a little bit more enriched because it's got the intent data behind it, or the intent behind it. So what we do is we have a bit of automation going on, so you can connect between the tools. Then it feeds into, it's just lead forensics visits feeds into our CRM. And then from there, you can make judgment calls about whether or not you're going to dial based on duration, what are they looking at? And if it's not going to fall into that bucket, then it might fall into another bucket of enrichment, because we all run email campaigns, for example. So it just becomes a question of who's going to own the next part of the engagement. Is it going to be a further marketing and piece of enrichment or qualification, or is it going to become a conversation for a seller? And, but once you've got it in the CRM, you've kind of gotten over the obstacle of you've got the data captured already. And that's a really nice way of getting volume into the data that you're bringing in, and addresses that whole recency question of keeping a fresh stream of businesses in the coming in to a stream of view that you can actually talk to.
So you're using lead forensics to kind of keep that data fresh, because you know that they're active prospects live on your website, and that's what you're kind of keeping that data topped up with fresh data. Is that right?
It's exactly that. Yeah, we have some paid ads as well. So it's kind of like a booster to paid ads. So because we have that, we can filter down through lead forensics filters to figure out exactly where people are coming in on those landing pages that we've got targeted. So it's that, I said at the beginning about the disparate pages on a website, but you can have, typically you'll have cornerstone pages where this is the thing I really want to sell. This is the service I want to sell this month, or I've got an offer on this. We can use paid plus lead forensics to kind of create a better view into what's coming in. So it's less of just looking at something. Everything's now under a bit of a microscope, and you can be more surgical as lead generation is. It's a lot more a surgical type of activity than say demand gen is.
Yes, absolutely. And so in terms of that, so you mentioned that you're using lead forensics to basically plug that into your sales team. Are you using it just to track like new business opportunities, or are you kind of looking at existing customers as well? How are you using that?
We do, and we also obviously have portals as well in our back end, so we can see what people are looking at, potential ways of doing upsells. We've just started doing a heat map exercise offline that plugs into.
Love a heat map.
Yeah, we love it too, and it's a good way of mapping. And we see a lot of success by retaining customers and then upselling into them. And now that we can use the data off of lead forensics to do that, I think it makes sellers happier with you to kind of collaborate, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So what does your tech stack currently look like at the minute then? So you mentioned that you've got Salesforce, you mentioned you've got lead forensics, you also mentioned that you've got some SEO tracking tools. But you also mentioned that you've kind of refined that tech stack so that you were talking about your budget constraints and all of that. So what are you kind of left with at the end that you consider to be like mission critical?
Well, it's anything that plugs that visibility gap. So I think you need the SEO piece and the SEO tool, but there's a lot of options now, and it's quite a lightweight option we run with, but it's just something that it gives me a way of understanding that we are behind the right keywords, and we're competing in the right spaces for those keywords, and getting the visibility in search engines that we need. But lead forensics obviously is a cornerstone of that. And then anything that you can use to add contact data into lead forensics as well, which I know you can run to the application anyway. But what you can do is you collect that business data and then you add into that the contact information, and you've got an end-to-end solution for capturing data. I mean, when you think about it, conversion rates on a website on a generous side is what, 3% of all traffic. So no matter how hard you work on doing the organic growth, you're not getting a lot really of data capture, and you've got the user privacy stuff coming in now as well. So really tightening that down. I can't stress that enough. So how are you going to widen that conversion rate? Well, this is exactly how you do it. You do the reverse IP tracking, you layer over some contact data, and then you eliminate a bit of the apprehension of cold calling, because you understand a little bit more about what people have been looking at. And you don't necessarily go in with an intrusive cold call, but you just sort of ease into, you know, there's intent there, and you can appeal to that intent, and you can kind of be, it's almost kismet by the time you reach out. You know, it's, I've been in the market looking for the specific thing, and, you know, you reach them, because as we all know, timing is the one thing you can't really control with a user who's looking to purchase something. And it will never be able to really control that. But this at least bridges that gap down a little bit and lets you understand who's looking at what. Interestingly, I was looking at, because I'm a content guy, I was looking at that, some stats around that a while ago, and it's something like 13 touch points before a user makes a decision. So one of the big conversations in our business is, what does that profile look like for a decision maker? What does that journey look like? And increasingly, there's more and more decision makers in the business as well. So, you know, that will impact the kind of data you're capturing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Do you know what? Just to add to just to build on your stat there, I'm gonna throw another one at you, and that is that 84% of buyers buy from the first business that they engage with. And so actually a lot of the time when I'm speaking to people at, you know, go out to trade shows and things like that, and when I'm talking about lead forensics, I'm saying to them, like, lead forensics is a tool to enable you to build rapport and engage with people at whatever point they are in the buying cycle, because you're quite right, you can't control that. There's only going to be a certain number of your prospects that are ready to fill out a form, ready to buy now. The rest of them are going to be somewhere in that buying cycle. But if you can start the conversation with them during that cycle, be there to help to answer any questions, help them on that journey, you are going to be the 84% buy from the first company that they engage with. If you're that company that they engage with every single time, then you've got a competitive advantage over, you know, every one of your competitors who are just waiting for the opportunity to land in their lap. I think it's about being proactive and helping people on the journey. And I know that that's what you're saying that your sales team do, is that they are proactive and they've started to actually understand the benefit of reaching out.
Yeah, it's definitely the direction we're moving in. I mean, it's quite interesting because if you know who's landing on the website earlier in the funnel, you can also help them find the information quicker and speed up that decision process. Because I don't know about you, but I think most people on this webinar will probably have at some point a conversation where someone goes, I've got a 12-month sales cycle. How do I shorten that? Because the investors or someone somewhere really wants that to look more like 6 months. They want it, and it's a really hard task to accomplish. But if you can see them quicker on, who's at the top of the funnel earlier on, you have some control over shortening the sales cycle, because you can serve up more relevant content.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can try and usher people through a little bit faster, like you say. It's but like you say, a little bit uncontrollable for us, but we can, like you say, help to guide people through that little bit faster. I totally agree with you. So Kane, what's next? What's next for CSI? What's on your radar? What's on your radar for the rest of 2024? I mean, where do you go when you've achieved a 650% uplift in your lead generation? Like, where do you go from there? It's an interesting one, isn't it? So I always have this thing called I always bring box office appeal into marketing. So I think box office is the right word for it, which is, you know, the end results of what you're producing. So we always try and at least get, in certain metrics, at least a 10% growth year on year on what we're doing. It's always kind of conservative. Obviously that wouldn't apply to the actual bottom line, but it's scale. How do we scale what we've done? And one of the things I'm looking at is not just scale in the kind of conventional sense, but repeatability as well. Like, what can we learn from the businesses who we've been able to interact with and win from?
And a lot of that, you can kind of look at the journeys through lead forensics because you can see what they've been landing on, what they've been consuming. So you can kind of almost recreate those pathways for other users who might be in the same position. So we have a specific niche called IBMI, which is an operating system on IBM Power Systems, and that gets us a lot of traffic. And that's the journey I'm as an example, a journey that I'm looking at retooling, because that's been really good for us organically as well. And there's a couple of customers in terms of feedback I get who don't want paid ads. They don't want to be served up a paid ad. They want to organically and naturally come across you and think, yes, you have the right expertise. So that's always an interesting thing to come across. So yeah, it's going to be how do we get the box office appeal for the next year is always going to be a question of how do we scale.
Do you know what? I think that you're right. I think a lot of buyers are being more discerning. Like, they understand that if you do PPC, you've paid for that, and anyone can pay for PPC as long as you throw some cash at it, right? Yeah. But SEO is much harder to achieve. You have to have substance behind your product and your brand and your website and your digital footprint if you're going to be able to achieve SEO. So it's interesting that you say that you've spoken to some buyers who basically trust SEO more than they do PPC. Yeah. I think PPC will always have its place. It's very expensive, but it will always have its place. But also garnering that trust is really vital. It's interesting that you meant that you said that you are looking for sort of lookalike audiences.
Yes.
So like sort of lookalike-y, sort of like people that have been successful, who else looks like that, so we can kind of recreate that process. Because I was hosting a webinar the other week, and the person I was speaking to, called Chloe, said that they have used lead forensics in their SEO strategy to look at what valuable customers are searching for, and that's what's determined their SEO keyword strategies, to kind of go for those lookalikes. So it's interesting now that in quite quick succession I've spoken to two people looking for lookalike audiences based upon behaviors. Yeah, so really interesting.
Yeah. We also do in our paid stream, we create lookalike based on audiences of people we know convert, but we also use lead forensics data to I sit down with a PPC manager and I give him lead forensics data constantly of what we know is relatively successful people we want to see more of.
Interesting.
So that's another way you can create lookalikes through just a degree of automation, but it's also, as you say, the patterns. So when you see a successful customer, you go back and you look at the footprint they've left behind on lead forensics, and you follow the journey, and you kind of reinforce the pages they've been on, work on that content, finesse that content, and try to bring that content up for other people who might be in a similar position.
Because that's really interesting. Just looping back to your kind of point around budget constraints, is if you know what's working, you can double down on that and stop doing the stuff that isn't working. Does that make sense? Is that something that you've used to optimize and kind of doubling down on the stuff that is working?
Well, it's at the moment, the world around us is economizing. So you've got to look creatively at how you can do things like, slim down your MarTech stacks, or where you can refine your budget. There's always this perception thing in marketing, and it's the expectation conversation we had before, where kind of people think that half of the marketing activity you'll do will be effective. But I think more and more that's not so accurate. There's A/B testing, there's experimentation, but the failed campaigns can be more and more intentional failures, insofar as you use the data that you learn from that to create the successful piece that follows. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just to summarize then, I think in terms of what you're saying in terms of your tech stack, you're really using that to plug this visibility gap. So it's really like anything that's going to give you better sight of your buyer journey. That's what you're looking for. Is that right?
It's exactly that. Yeah. And it's quite interesting. I think we've come out of a golden age where you had like free and easy reporting tools and free and easy data access. And it was a bit more lax, a bit more relaxed in general. And even when you look at Google Analytics 4 now, the interface looks like it's something that will eventually have some paid element to it. So I do think, it's worth having a kind of internal question of, is it time to start thinking about budgeting for reporting and for data generally in your marketing space? And I think, emphatically the answer to that's going to be yes. And I think that at least if you're having the questions and you're kind of ahead of everyone else. But yeah, I think when you say where to next, we always, I'm always at least one mind on keeping the reporting there, keeping something that's keeping me accurate to grading what I'm doing. So I use lead forensics in that sense as well, benchmarking what I'm doing. But I do think we're moving into an era where data will become harder to capture, harder to get, and therefore it can become expensive if you're not careful. Yeah. So I think you've got to experiment now with how you collect it. And it's the same with reporting as well. I think that change will definitely come.
I totally agree with you, Jay. I mean, who knows, but that just looks like prime to start charging. I agree. And so, Kane, what I'm going to come on to in a second is just give you a couple of seconds just to think about this. And that is, what would your top 3 things be that you would want to leave as a takeaway for anyone listening today to just either get started or pieces of advice to focus on? You know, what would be your top 3 things? Before we do that, I'm just going to flash up that poll one more time, because I know we've had a few people join us since the beginning, to basically say that, lead forensics is the number 1 in website visitor identification. We can tell you who's visiting your website, be it a new business prospect or a customer. We can give you their contact information, and you can start those valuable kind of conversations when people are in that buying cycle. If you want to take a demo of lead forensics today, or you don't need to do it today, you just need to let us know today, then we'll send you a copy of our hardback book that's on Amazon. It's priced $79.99 on Amazon. And we'll give you that for free. So it's hardback, and it's followed 101 ways for you to be able to drive revenue from your website. So if you're doing everything possible with your website right now, brilliant. This will validate that. But I'm sure that in 101 ways, there's probably going to be 1 or 2 tips in there that you're probably not doing at the minute. So lots of helpful advice in there. It's been kind of curated over quite a long time, chatting with people like Kane who have been there, who have done that. So I will start that poll just now. So if you would like to take a demo of lead forensics, and actually you get a free trial of lead forensics, you can see who's visiting your website for free for 2 weeks just from attending this webinar, which I should be very excited about. I'm very excited about your free trial, but I'm also very excited about the content in this book. So you can also get a copy of the book too. So I'll just leave that on screen for a couple of seconds more, and then Kane, I'll hand over to you for your kind of, I'm going to say final 3 thoughts for people to take away with them. Just got a couple more people voting. They're giving me their feedback there on that poll. So I'm just going to end that now. And I'm going to hand over to you, Kane, for your final 3 takeaways.
Fab. So I think the first one, and we've talked a lot about it, it's a kind of a soft skill, is become a bit of an expectation setter. And a part of that is ask the really fundamental questions. We said, what's a lead? What does marketing mean for this company? Is it lead generation? Is it demand gen? And just really own that bit of marketing, right? And then, even if the expectations are there to be shaped, then you can kind of take the bull by the horns and own that by itself. You can shape what it means for the company. And I think that's something to get in front of. The big one, and the kind of to the data theme, it's get ahead with your data. I think there's certain things that we know are coming. We know there's a lot happening with regulation. We've talked about this visibility gap. We've talked about data degradation today. So I think you can kind of help yourself out now by experimenting with a process or workflow that captures data for you, that's a bit more end-to-end, that gives you the insight you need. And, look at, if nothing else, just audit what's in your MarTech stack and ask, does it give you the analytics and visibility that you're going to need to set yourself up for another couple of years? And kind of comes to my last point, which is the box office. What does your box office look like? What are the metrics that you're grading yourself on? Do they work in a common language that everyone else can connect with? If you're locked in the boardroom with the CFO tomorrow to talk about budgets, what are you going to say? What metrics would you kind of pin yourself to? And my suggestion on that, and what's always worked for me, has been, it's the common financial rhetoric that works. It's talking in the same language that your sales guys are graded on, and that typically resonates every single time. So it's expectations. It's doing something proactively with your data now, because I think there's still a chance to experiment, and why not? You could get innovative with it. It doesn't have to cost the earth. And then from that, how do you benchmark yourself? Well, it's your box office, and your box office is yours to make what it is. But if you really want to resonate and capture the ears of the board, and you want to talk about getting more budget in the future, speak in their language.
That's brilliant. I think there's some great tips there. I'm going to add one on, which is from what you said earlier, if that's okay. And that is about thinking about your website as a revenue engine. It doesn't need to be a passive thing that doesn't do anything, that's just there because we feel like we need to have a website. It doesn't need to be that way. It also doesn't need to be a pretty picture lookbook. It can be meaningful and it can drive revenue. And I think if you're asking yourself, like, is this going to turn my website into a revenue engine, then that's the right question to be asking. Because if you're investing in something that's not going to enable that on your website, then it's pointless. But I know that Kane, you mentioned that I've used your words there, sort of turning your website into a revenue engine. I think is a really easy thing for people to be able to remember. Like, is this going to actually make a difference to the bottom line? Like that's
exactly
really
that. The word revenue in itself is very intentionally used there. Because marketing doesn't have to sit in some corner office by itself, playing with a pack of crayons or something. It can be involved in the bigger picture of sales.
Yes. Yeah, I fully agree with you. We are not the colouring in brigade, which is what I was told once upon a time 20 years ago. So yes, we, like you say, that I think you mentioned about making marketing become scientific. I think I might have used scientific. It used something different.
Surgical, I think I was saying.
Surgical, yes, but similar sort of sentiment there. It's actually using your platform. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right, brilliant. I am conscious of time. I know we've run over. I'm so sorry, everyone. This is probably the third or fourth time we've chatted, Kane, and I've written a page of notes myself from what you've been saying. Every time I speak to you, I get something extra. So I really appreciate you spending the time with us today. I really do.
Thank you so much.
What we won't do is we won't go to any questions today. I know we had a couple come through, but what I'll do instead is, Kane, if it's okay, if anyone's got any questions, are they okay to reach out to you on LinkedIn? Yeah, please do. Please feel free to connect and drop me any questions you have. Okay, super. Well, I hope everybody, gained value from today. I know I certainly did. And so if there's anything that you would like to ask Kane afterwards, or myself, I think Kane will probably be more useful, but feel free to connect with either of us on LinkedIn and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions. If you've requested a demo or a book, a member of my team will be in touch with you really soon to get that booked in for you. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. And thank you so much again, Kane. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me. It's been really good. Good stuff. Thank you so much. Thanks so much.